Welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to focus in on incident response, something that we see a lot here. My name is Libby Robinson. I'll be your host today for the short session. I have a background in, I did mechanical engineering at school, which was a very expensive piece of paper at the end, because I then switched into product management and product marketing as my background. I've been in cybersecurity space in the private sector for about 15 years now, but really excited today to introduce you to Monique, who is going to be our main speaker, who is an expert in all things incident response. She runs our incident response services here. Well, in fact, she runs our security services team, and as part of that, does a lot of the incident response projects that we get in. She has an extensive history in the cybersecurity industry. And Monique, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that was good. That was perfect.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So what we're really hoping to give you guys today is really a à tête reposée, as they say en français, sort of a nice calm look at what an incident response life cycle looks like. Know what happens, how it's identified, how we resolve it, how we get companies back in business, and also a little bit of starting off with kind of the do's and don'ts, because a lot of the time, unfortunately, when something happens, it does kind of stop your heart. Sort of like when you hit reply all to everybody and think you just did reply to one person and say all kinds of funky things. It's that heart and mouth moment, right? And people sometimes with the best intentions make some mistakes. So want to help you prevent some of those as well. And then what are some, give you guys some takeaways in terms of what things can you do to really be the most prepared, unfortunately, if this does happen to you in the future. So to start off with, just a brief intro of incident. This is it's a bit funny that a cyber incident needs a bit of description, but people do take different assumptions about this. So the NIST definition is an incident that targeting the enterprise use of cyberspace. So that is basically your cyber landscape, your network, your devices, that sort of thing. And there are lots of different ranges of incident too. I think a lot of us tend to think of an incident being like, full defenses down, full successful break and enter sort of thing. But an incident can be an attempt at one of these things, or a first landing, if you will, if someone is trying to land and expand. Essentially, it is to disrupt, disable, destroy, or maliciously control an environment. So the definition being that it is an attempt to do one of these things, often by an external party, but it can be internal as well. To either destroy the data integrity or to steal controlled information. So the other thing I think that, it used to be more, big nation state attacks, or it was large organizations and it was companies going after the IP, that sort of thing. I think, Monique, you can probably confirm that a lot of it is now financially motivated as well, right? It's unfortunately become easier for attackers to get access to money, and through this sort of strange network, I suppose, or forum, they can, share tactics, share techniques and everything. So a lot of it is financially motivated as well. Getting into what do we see when companies eventually do come to us, or in general, what happens when people think that they are being attacked, or sort of confirm that they're making attacked, or that they're being attacked rather. It's worth pointing out that these really are best intentions, right? People are they're kind of running in panic. They are trying to stop it as quickly as possible. They're trying to prevent any further damage. So these things, people aren't trying to make things worse. But oftentimes, unfortunately, when you don't really know what to do and you don't have a good sort of plan in place, unfortunately, some of the things that administrators do, the actions they take, can actually make things harder from an incident response perspective. So the biggest one is that they wait a little bit too long, right? So They think that something is going on. They suspect something is going on, and they think, oh, you know what, we can stop this or we can control it. But it turns out, you know, they really can't. And they're doing this because they are trying to keep the business up and running, right? They don't want to shut anything down. They don't want to prevent, you know, business from continuing. So they just think, oh, you know what, it's not so bad. We can stop it. And we'll actually get to when we sort of talk about some of the trends that we see. This is why we get a lot of incident responses coming in, or incident response projects coming in on Friday, because they realize they're getting towards the weekend, and they probably can't go on the weekend with this action happening. Sometimes they focus just on the restoration, so getting back into business. Makes it really hard from a forensics perspective to sort of really decipher and figure out what actually happened, where the vulnerabilities and gaps were that allowed this to happen in the first place. So basically, it's sort of trying to get back up without taking the time, without sort of preserving the information that allows us to understand the nature of the attack, and really to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. And also, we should say that in order to make sure that we actually did, stop the attack, and that we have neutralized the impact. And then also we see a lot that companies just, it's not something that most companies want to think about, cyber incidents. So they sort of, it sometimes doesn't, isn't a priority to get a good response plan in place, or they don't have cyber insurance or legal counsel. Or even if they do, they don't know who should I be calling right off the bat? Who needs to be part of this? Who needs to be part, who are the sort of even internal stakeholders that need to be part of our response plan, all that kind of stuff. So as you can see, a lot of these mistakes are very sort of preventable. So, Monique's going to get into the end about some ways that you can really mostly prepare yourself just in case this does happen. I mentioned at the beginning that the reality is that, they can occur anytime, but often towards the end of the week, weekends, and holidays. So this happens in two ways. So first, the attackers are often trying to choose times where they think that there's fewer people watching. But we also find that a lot of the times that by the time a company calls us, it's towards the end of the week, because they have been trying to battle it internally for, during the week, and realize that they're coming up on a weekend, and they really need to act on it. So, unfortunately, the reality, it's no longer reserved, for lack of a better word, for the very large organizations, for the very, very, very wealthy organizations. One of my colleagues here once said that, hey, with the technology and tactics that attackers have, if you have, as an organization, if you have $5,000 in your bank account, I'll take that $5,000. It's better than nothing, right? So it really does, unfortunately, happen, or can happen to anybody. And I'm going through these. Monique, please, this is sort of where we're going to hand it over to our expert here. We do see a range in sophistication. So absolutely, there is a lot of conversation about AI and what that's going to do to the nature of attacks in the future. And it's something that absolutely we need to be keeping our eye on. But there's still tried and true attacks that have been happening since the dawn of cyber attacks that we're seeing around, around vulnerabilities and things that really we should be getting better at protecting ourselves from. So it's not, and I only say that not for doom and gloom, but just sort of yes, there's the future of cybersecurity, but there's absolutely things that you can be doing today to best protect yourself from any kind of any sort of range of attack. And often what they're looking to do is to take advantage of sort of the weakest link, right? So they're getting in there and they're looking for the weakest link to get in, so that they can then escalate, they can expand, they can move around, they can find the privilege that they need to really ultimately reach their goals. So it's often a sort of a multi-pronged attack, and they're just looking for that one way in, right? Unfortunately, that's all they need. On that note, Monique, I'm going to hand it over to you to sort of walk through what a cyber incident looks like, and what the incident and what the response is all about.
Perfect. Thank you, Libby. So, incident response, just like anything else in cyber, and preparation for it is a kind of a continuous, it's an infinite game. So, while we're going to talk about this, just keep in mind that this is always evolving, and we encourage organizations to be prepared and kind of review their preparation annually. But usually an incident response really, as we define it, is when the incident or the security compromise is discovered by the organization. And hopefully in an organization that is ready, that kind of starts executing their own incident response plan. So that having that in place usually helps organizations in terms of having a logical methodological response framework that allows them. But we see it all. And even with prepared organizations, what you face is never what you expect or what's on paper. So our involvement gets in when we get contacted by a prospect. And typically we get a call and we arrange, a scoping call to better understand what happens. So it's really just kind of allowing the victim to tell us the story. What did you detect? How did you find it? What actions have you taken? What do you care about? In many cases, as Libby alluded to earlier, every organization, and rightfully so, wants to get back into business because that's the biggest impact on any organization. But there could be other concerns, from reputational damage, from client information, from leaked information. All of that matters. So during that process, what we do is kind of listen, provide advice and guidance in terms of, what have you done? Have you contained it properly? Do you want to take more aggressive, I'll say, containment, such as disconnecting from the internet? So that to ensure that the threat actor is not maintaining access, and that varies depending on when the incident is discovered. We need to talk about data preservation. So incident response really needs data to be able to forensically investigate what happened, to better tell the story of what the threat actor did, what did they access, how did they access. And then what most clients forget about is insurance and legal counsel. There are regulations in place, and I'll go into that a bit more, the companies must abide by, federally or provincially or statewide, that you need to address if there's a compromise. So based on that, we kind of present certain approaches, which I'll go into, and those approaches really vary depending on the situation.
Yeah, Monique, you mentioned there that you have that initial conversation and you kind of go through what happened, what did you see? I think there is, sadly, almost sometimes a bit of a stigma around having suffered an incident. And there needn't be at all, right? I think it's a lot of their time that's like, oh, I should have done this, or maybe if I'd only done that. I think, the thing to take away here is you don't have to impress the cyber analysts with everything, right? If you don't know, that's okay too, right? That's sort of why you bring in experts. So to your point, the sooner the better, and don't feel like you need to have everything all mapped out, right? But just sharing the information that you have. And there really is no shame. You don't have to be embarrassed. You don't have to sort of, the fact that there's still a stigma based on how common it is a bit crazy.
Yeah. And even like really secure organizations, right? It can happen to them. It takes a click on a URL to download a malicious malware, or to download something, or to provide a password. They do take advantage of kind of the human element of us and our mistakes. And we'll talk a bit about that, but it varies quite a bit, but it doesn't matter how much security you have, you may still be impacted. I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
I'll talk a bit about our approach at Field Effect. And I think for us, there are two things that we want to do and want to ensure we can provide to the victim. One is tell what happened. So what do we know about historical data? How did the threat actor get in? How do we investigate? We need to identify the gaps to help mitigate and block those gaps in the future. So we need to look at the history to tell the story, but also to build that timeline of how long was the threat actor in there? What did they access? How did they access the data? But at the same time, that is only one aspect. We want to ensure that the victim is secure moving forward. And so we need to contain the threat, prevent it from occurring again, and providing continuous monitoring. At Field Effect, we use Covalence, our MDR platform, to allow us to do that. We deploy it across the environment to ensure that we have good insight into what is happening on the network as the network recovers. So that's critical for us as we move forward. As part of our incident response, I'll go into kind of what are the components, or what's involved in our offering, and how we would want every incident response to kind of occur. And the key thing here is case management. So we provide that as part of our incident response packages, and that is really somebody to guide the client in that process. A client is typically panicked, may or may not be prepared, may or may not have the right coordination resources. So we can provide that to allow that coordination, to give them updates on the investigations, updates on the monitoring. So in that way, we become an extension of the client's incident response team. That's how we view it. Kind of provide them with the advice on containment, remediation, and recovery. But also, we really need to present kind of the considerations on legal engagements, on cyber insurance, on negotiations. A lot of questions, we receive questions like, do we pay? Do we not pay? Do we contact the threat actor? Please do not contact the threat actor. But, what do we do? And many clients do not think about those aspects. And they, if you haven't had to prepare for it or didn't prepare for it, those are not questions that come to you as part of your regular kind of cybersecurity preparation. So, and then the key part of us is the investigative lens. So we have a group of investigators that will look at data that we collect from the environment, the impacted environment, and we have a number of questions we're trying to answer. What happened? How did the threat actor get in? What did they do? When did it happen? When did it start? When was, what was patient zero? How did they gain access to patient zero? And how did they kind of spread within the network? And what was the last activity on the network? So that is really important for us. Want to define those parameters is to also define kind of safe recovery points for the network. Which systems were compromised. So, am I rebuilding my entire network? Am I rebuilding just my servers? How do we ensure, what is the impact? And then how? So the how is the thing that takes us the longest, probably. We really try to focus initially on root cause identification, because we want to make sure we mitigate the initial access vector and kind of block it as soon as possible. And then following that, we kind of just look at threat actor techniques and procedures to better understand how did they move laterally, how did they escalate privileges, how were they able to, what were they able to misuse to gain access to an environment. And then indicators of compromise, those are important for us, because if we identify a malicious IP address, we need to ensure that our monitoring service is aware of those indicators of compromise so that we can block those. And then why? So typically a threat actor, as we mentioned earlier, is really interested in money. Cyber criminals want money. It's mostly either to kind of lure a victim to pay them, either to recover data or to prevent the publication of data, on the dark web.
Yeah, so really, you're just trying to get a sense of getting full situational awareness before.
Yeah. 100%. That's kind of key for us and a lot of it is, it does shed the light onto some of the gaps, but also some of the things that you can't mitigate sometimes, because a threat actor just needs one thing, and also highlights to a client, to a victim, how, what their security monitoring solution should look for, right? So if a threat actor was able to do this, then my security monitoring solution in the future should be able to look at these aspects, these techniques, and look at ways to prevent it. That's kind of what, there's a lot of educational aspect in incident response.
Yeah, and I imagine it's important to have a good sense of this before we're even taking action, right? Just a sense of just to get that situational awareness before really,
Yeah.
All right.
So really, you know, the investigative lens is important, but the investigative lens kind of is only one aspect. The security monitoring is what kind of gives the victim the assurance that they are secure moving forward, right? So how do we do that? How do we ensure that, you know, one, they're protected against this attack, but potentially future attacks, right? Like no matter what, we can't stop attacks, we can detect them and react to them, but those threat actors are going to try to attack networks. For us, as I mentioned earlier, we use Covalence, we deploy a network sensor, we deploy endpoint agents as well. We do cloud integrations with certain services. That allows us to provide holistic monitoring. So we want to ensure that there's no pivoting from one kind of IT system to another or one service to another. We want to ensure that we're providing that. That allows us to do that. As well, we use kind of detection policies to react to threat actor activities. You know, they could be general that are, you know, we see normally regular, normal, well-known TTPs and IUCs, but tailored. So if we know a threat actor has used, let's say, a certain remote management tool during the compromise, and they use legitimate tools during compromises, then we can put specific policies against that specific tool that was used by the threat actor. So that becomes, you know, it's a cycle. What we identify from the investigation feeds into monitoring and vice versa. And then kind of that also helps us in kind of investigating the incident. Go ahead. And then we can't forget about kind of security intelligence and threat monitoring. So if a threat actor has compromised or deployed ransomware and has encrypted data and has taken data, a main concern for victims is this data going to be published? Who is the threat actor? Can we attribute it? Do we see that? And so that's where kind of our security intelligence team comes into place to help us based on what we know from the investigations, from the monitoring, is can we attribute it to a threat actor? What what ransomware family it is? What are the known TTPs and IUCs? We can look at attribution, and it's sometimes, in some cases we do see threat actors do publish if the client or a victim does not pay the ransom and have a policy for that, then sometimes they do publish their information. And so there is that aspect. There's a threat of, potentially reselling the data. And so there's a lot of aspects of threat intelligence and dark web monitoring that we try to do as part of it. That is limited for us at Field Effect, but it is kind of really a supplementary to the function versus the main function.
Yeah, before we move on, so I mean, the dark web monitoring and seeing if it's being put up for sale is a fairly obvious one. But what's the value of sort of the other security intelligence research? Like, why are you looking for that information?
So in general, for cybersecurity, in general, you want to see what is being published and what new threats are being identified so that we can enhance cybersecurity monitoring of kind of our regular clients who we are monitoring on a day-to-day basis. So if there's I'll use something very simple, there's a new vulnerability in Chrome of this version, we want to then identify it and ensure where is it in our fleet? Where does it occur within the Covalence monitoring environment? And then to ensure that we have the right policies in place to react to that, but also to inform clients that you have a certain software, let's say, that is vulnerable at the moment, that should be updated, or there's a new 0-day that is attacking a certain software and you should kind of address it right away. That is key in terms of just regular cybersecurity practices and I'll say reducing threat surface.
Got it. Thank you.
So, all of this happens and the goal is to restore the environment. So it is not a linear process. All of these could be happening and are intermingled. So as we're doing investigation, we're talking about restorations. When is it good to repair? But to restore and repair systems. And the key thing for us here is to ensure we need to know what systems and data were impacted before we start restoration. The other aspect is that we need to know what to restore first. So this is where preparation comes in mind for a client or for an organization. Do we know as an organization which systems are critical for our business functions? Many organizations, and if you asked, the kind of C-suite, they'll say, I want my email. But that's not necessarily what really runs your business. It could be your CRM. It could be a number of other aspects of your business. So knowing which systems to recover first, one gives us as investigators and incident responders a goal of these are the critical systems that we need to look at first, and these are the critical systems we need to recover first. In most cases, if a victim has good backups and good, have done good practices in restorations and backups, then we look at backups to restore the environment. And what we see less of these days is with the backups being encrypted because the backups are domain connected, for instance. But the key thing for us is, in preparation, we want those to be separate from the main network, which allows us to be able to restore. But it's critical because what we find in the investigation gives us a safe point of recovery for backups. So, which backup do we use to recover? And then in restorations, negotiations may come into place. So negotiations have legal implications because, federally, there are laws that could put the victim, they could become kind of charged if they pay in a ransomware actor, because a ransomware actor may be classified as a terrorist organization or something similar. Hence, there are legal implications, and all of that should be done with a legal advice. In certain cases, negotiations may be the only choice, because if your backups are gone and your data is gone and you have critical data for your business to function, and sometimes we see it rarely, but we do see it where a victim has to ends up paying. But it is a process, right, in terms of what the function of the negotiator is in this aspect to restore your data. And then what we always forget about is the communications. So what we find, organizations don't know what to do. Like, do I tell my staff? What do I tell my staff? What directions do we give staff so that what they can and can't do or can and can't say? So if you're, let's say you're a salesperson in an organization and currently you can't process any sales, then what do you tell your clients? What do you tell them, right? So, you need to have that in mind. You need to practice that in advance. So that's one aspect. But then there's the external communications, is that, partners, stakeholders, media, depending on the type of organization that you are and where you sit within the economy, that there may be different pressures on you from the media and the public in terms of what is, I no longer have that service. So those are key points that are not really technical in nature, but they are related to the response. So response is not just technology, it's about the processes and the people that are involved in these processes. So we see quite a bit of that. Ideally, if everything goes well, we're able to restore the environment, we have monitoring in place, and then we can kind of get to the point where we de-escalate the incident response case and kind of move into reporting. So in reporting, what our approach at Field Effect is to really be objective and unbiased. We focus on the evidence. We try not to give our opinions or give kind of, what we think happened or what might have happened. So that's really important, one, for the organization itself, but also it needs to address the questions that an organization may get from insurance or legal questions. And that's that. So we, like any other kind of policing investigation, you want to stick to the facts. And that's what we try to do here. So
Monique, before we get into sort of the post-incidents now, or post-incident, And I know that it varies whether it's a very minor versus a very, so almost a catastrophic. But what are some ranges and sort of expectation of timeline between this your sort of situational awareness and the investigative lens and sort of when a company is restored? Like, and you can give a range of low end to high end sort of thing. But what's a reasonable timeline there?
I would say on the low end, it's 3 weeks to kind of feel like it's concluded, right? That we have a full, you could definitely start restoration on day 2, right? But it doesn't always happen that way. It goes back and forth. So it's about 2 to 3 weeks would be kind of, great. High-end months.
Yeah. And I guess that goes back to like how important it is in that immediate time, right? Not to waste time on just like, what do I do, right? Like that's sort of the value of at least having a sense of, okay, well, this is what I need to do. And then I can at least start executing on that as opposed to,
And in many cases, obviously the size of the environment matters. If we've seen a lot this year where things like virtualized environments were compromised themselves, so the hosts were VMware ESXi were compromised, and then that kind of is paralyzing because then you have to rebuild everything. We can't even get data to do the investigation.
Right.
So there are as the complexity of the attack as it's more complex, then it becomes harder.
Thank you.
I'll talk a bit about post-incident. So, we've closed the incident, we've given the report. Now this is where data notifications, victim notifications matter. This is where, each one of us has probably received an email from an account that they had somewhere that got compromised and saying, oh, to protect this account, you're being added to this list, or to inform you. So all of this really depends on what data was compromised and what data, can we assess and determine, was there personally identifiable information in that data? This is where legal obligations and having a lawyer or a breach counsel is critical, because they will guide an organizations in kind of that legal framework and based on what we know from the incident, what should and should not be done. So that is one aspect. Post-incident is a good opportunity for any organization to look at their security control plan. So what were my gaps? What have I mitigated? What have I mitigated temporarily? What do I need to really examine longer term in terms of how do I secure my network? In many cases, we see re-engineering of networks and redesign of networks following an incident, because it triggers an organization to say, okay, where else can I add more security controls? How do I do that? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is educating employees. So all of us as humans have a role in cybersecurity, whether it's which passwords do I use, which sites do I visit, but also, what happened about the incident? How do I tell, what is the impact on the reputation of the organization? All of those post-incident kind of considerations are really important at this stage. As well, I'll say inform authorities. So, informing policing organizations. That doesn't happen very often in Canada or in the US, but it is a way that allows policing organizations to do further research on threat actors, maybe take down certain infrastructure. All of that is dependent on organizations reporting the indicators of compromise, not necessarily everything that happened during an incident to those organizations, but that is an aspect, so that it allows kind of federal organizations to be able to do more. But again, those are all organizational choices that should be taken and vary from organization to organization. So the key aspect, what I would encourage, is be prepared. It's, be prepared by having the right security monitoring in place to avoid that. In many organizations, why am I spending all of this so that if something that may or may not happen? It's kind of like your regular home insurance, right? It's not different from that. And it allows you to just have somebody helping you watch that. So reduce your threat surface and have a good monitoring solution in place. Establish an incident response plan. Who's who in your team? Who is your external support team? What are your high value assets? Which ones do I recover first? Does my backup work? Does my recovery work? Which systems do I restore first? And what is my communication plan? So everything that we talked about, all of this should be, if you have an incident response plan, it should be part of your incident response plan. At some level, it doesn't have to be very detailed, but you should have that. And then practice your plan, right? So a tabletop exercise is a really safe way to be presented with a simulated incident that allows you to kind of have a discussion about what would happen if we find this. What do we do next? Who do we call? Who do we inform? All of that allows you to just build resiliency, so you're not panicked. The key point is you don't want to be panicked, and know the things to be watchful for. Similar to anything else, not all incidents are the same, and your practice is not going to be the same as what you face. But having that kind of general knowledge and that comfort is really what a tabletop exercise will give you.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, Monique, when you guys do this, you guys sit in shadowy rooms with hoodies on to really play the role of the villain. Yeah, okay.
Of the villain, sometimes.
If movies and TV have taught me nothing else, that's how all attackers look. So it's important. It's an important part, I'm sure.
Yeah, it is a key factor of the roles we play during an incident.
That's right.
So a bit about kind of what we offer here at Field Effect to help in these organizations. So we mentioned Covalence. That is kind of the preparatory monitoring service that we offered to provide real-time protection, containment, and response, 24/7 threat monitoring, blocking. That is a way for us to, if we see a threat actor is going to try to, has many steps to reach the data. The key point is we want to block that threat actor at one of those steps before they reach the data. That is the key aspect of any cybersecurity solution that where we're seeing sophisticated techniques being used, is we want to be able to block them, if not at step 1, at step 2, at step 3, and sometimes at multiple steps. And we do see that. So through Covalence, we're able to provide that. And then cybersecurity is not just about technology. It is about building good practices and resilience within our plans, processes, and people. And with that, Field Effect offers a suite of professional cybersecurity services, including incident response, that allow us to help organizations mature or along their cyber maturity journey.
We do have a couple of questions that came in. I think that maybe some of them you answered further on, but I'll bring them up anyways, just in case. So the first one came in fairly early, I think, when you were talking about the various teams and people that need to be involved. And the question was, what is the process to engage third-party incident response services if the customer has a cyber insurance policy and/or legal counsel?
So that is a good question. And it's dependent on what the terms of the cyber insurance policy. So sometimes your cyber insurance policy will dictate who you can and can't engage as an organization. Sometimes cyber insurance, they have kind of their own, sometimes incident response teams, and sometimes they have, groups or organizations they work with. That may dictate to an organization who they can deal with. It's the same for breach counsel. So that is one aspect. Sometimes they do give organization a leeway in terms of, this is what we recommend. You may choose to go with whoever, but it is on a case-by-case basis, but it can, in some cases, dictate what an organization can and can't do. But that's, so always we recommend kind of, reviewing those and knowing what your cyber insurance policy covers and what kind of also, who to call about that, right? Do you call them first? Do you call a third-party incident response team first?
Yeah, perfect. And this one, I think you did touch on near the end here, but and I can take this one as well. But what kind of monitoring do you leave in place post-incident? So this this first block up here is our, and Monique mentioned our Covalence MDR platform. So that is the tool that the cyber analyst team uses when they're working through an incident response, and that solution stays in place for the extent of the incident response and a little bit longer, just to make sure that the threat has been eliminated. And oftentimes, our IR customers, opt to have Covalence, sort of as a permanent fixture post IR. So hopefully that answered that question. There was one other, a new one that just popped in at the end, and it is so you were going through the tabletop exercises. So the question is, what is a tabletop exercise example? So maybe like, what does that look like? How does it kick off, that kind of thing? Yeah,
that's a good question. A tabletop exercise is simply we simulate what happens when let's say an organization, I'm going to use simple terms. You log in on Thursday morning, somebody calls the IT department and says, I can't access my files. I can't do my business. What do you do? So we start off from the initial reporting to the organization of something wrong happening on the network, to then defining that it was not an IT issue, but a cybersecurity issue, to then taking you to an investigation, to monitoring, to restoration. We do that through kind of a series of injections where we evolve the scenario based on that. All of our scenarios are designed to a client's environment. So, we would do that with kind of some internal guidance from the client to better understand where is your critical information, what are your objectives in terms of recovery. If you have that, we're trying to test your incident response plan. And if you don't have one, then we're trying to test your response so that you can develop a plan. But that's what we're trying to do. So it's really, we take what we're learning in regular incident response and flip it into a fake scenario so that we can assess it. We will put injects like somebody, releasing information about the compromise, somebody learning about it through association. What do you do so that we can bring in the aspects of communications, of negotiations? We bring all of that in place simply like we would do in a normal incident. But it does have to happen with the key stakeholders within an organization to make sure they are practicing and learning.
Would you recommend notifying your general legal counsel in addition to who your cyber insurance directs you to? I'm going to take a first crack at this and say that's probably an excellent question to validate with your general legal counsel and your cyber insurance first. Make sure that you know what they are expecting of you, so you don't land in hot water. But Monique, what's your take on?
Yeah, for sure. I think you should, like internally, if you have legal counsel, your general legal counsel, they would be the first go-to. And small organizations, many organizations that we help in these situations, they don't have that. So they end up going to somebody specific. But yes, go to your internal legal counsel in your incident response preparation. Talk to your internal legal counsel, get their opinion about it. Even if you don't have that, you don't need an external counsel. You could just be internally.
This one's a spicy one, Monique. Are you ready? Have you had to support a customer with an incident response where they were already using Covalence?
It's a great question. So I'll say this, right? So incident response, when we talk about an incident, it's a major compromise across a network. So we'll go back to that definition that we put it at the start. In terms of what happens for Covalence clients, obviously we do not stop attacks. They are happening. People get phishing emails, they click on links, something gets downloaded. The key point is we are looking at events versus incidents. In Covalence, we've always kind of, the way that the platform is designed and the way the platform responds to cybersecurity events is it responds at those different, I'll say, stages of a compromise where we're able to take action to an event versus a huge incident where an enterprise is compromised. So we haven't had that, but every day we are preventing an attack. We have an active response capability that allows us to take action if we have confirmation that there's a tactic or a technique being used that is malicious on a client system.
Covalence is actively monitoring and blocking and isolating and all that sort of thing. We haven't had a client be like fully massively breached, but to your point, that's the idea of having a monitoring service, right? Is you're seeing every little attempt, every little anomaly, every little weird user behavior, and we're spotting those all the time, right? Because you say we can't stop the attacks, we can't stop the threat, but what we can do is protect the environment from major breach.
Right.
And I think we are already a little bit over time, so we will absolutely follow up with the additional questions that we didn't get to. Thank you, everybody, so much for participating. Hope you guys were able to take something away. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Monique, for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.